The atmosphere on Lauricia always felt too damn thick. Chris Winters adjusted the collar of his standard issue cargo uniform as he stepped off his ship. The reliable disappointment, a name his ex had once called him, that he'd reclaimed with stubborn pride. Streams of purple-hued light filtered through the spaceport's massive crystalline dome, casting everything in a surreal violet glow. Manifest and cargo inspection. Earthman, the port official, his violet skin a shade darker than most Lycians Chris had encountered, barely looked up from his terminal. Chris slid his cargo tablet across the counter. Just the usual agricultural equipment, medical supplies, and about 200 cases of something called Earth whiskey that your upper class can't seem to get enough of. The official's mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. You've been to Laria before, yet you still wear those emotion dampening gloves. You realize they mark you as an off-worlder who can't handle our emotional transference. Chris flexed his glove fingers. Last time I shook hands with a customs agent without them, I spent 3 hours feeling homesick for a planet I've never visited. Emotional honesty frightens you. Humans not frightened, just prefer my feelings to be, actually mine. Chris retrieved his approved manifest with a quick nod. Besides, makes it harder for you to tell when I'm lying about those extra cases of whiskey. The official's eyes widened. That was a joke, Chris added quickly. Earth humor, dark and self-deprecating. Your humor, like your emotional barriers, is strange. The official waved him through. Proceed to loading dock 7 for cargo transfer and be warned there's a diplomatic summit today. Security is heightened. Chris hefted his duffel bag. Great, more people to accidentally offend. The spaceport's main concourse bustled with more activity than his last 6 visits combined. Delegates from across the system moved in colorful clusters, their translators creating a cacophony of overlapping voices. Chris kept his head down. 30 years of life had taught him one reliable lesson: when important people gathered, insignificant cargo pilots should make themselves invisible. He checked his wrist terminal. 40 minutes until the cargo transfer, just enough time to grab a cup of something resembling coffee from one of the food dispensaries. As he approached the central atrium, something prickled at the back of his neck, an instinct he developed during dicey deliveries to the outer colonies. A flash of movement caught his eye, a maintenance worker moving too purposefully toward a structural support column, glancing too frequently at a concealed device on their wrist. Chris stared, trying to convince himself he was being paranoid. The worker placed a small package against the column and stepped away, moving too quickly. Now, hey, Chris called out, drawing confused looks from nearby travelers. The worker froze, locked eyes with Chris, then bolted. Shit. Chris's hand moved to his emergency comm. But before he could activate it, the world exploded. The blast threw him against a pillar. His ears rang as emergency alarms wailed. Smoke filled the atrium and screams echoed from all directions. Chris staggered to his feet, his vision swimming. Years of emergency training kicked in. Find cover, assist others, move to evacuation points. But the second explosion collapsed a section of the ceiling. Through the chaos, he spotted a young woman with luminescent violet skin pinned beneath fallen debris. Without thinking, he rushed toward her. Don't move, Chris shouted, reaching her side and assessing the situation. A support beam had collapsed across her legs, but it hadn't crushed them, just trapped her. Her eyes, a startling silver against her violet skin, widened in panic. Please help me, she gasped in perfect English, her translator pendant glowing at her throat. I've got you, Chris said, bracing himself against the beam. When I lift you, pull yourself out, okay? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Chris heaved, muscles straining, sweat breaking across his forehead. The beam shifted enough for her to drag herself free, leaving a smear of darker purple blood on the polished floor. Another explosion rocked the terminal. Chris pulled the woman behind a fallen column. As debris rained around them, she clung to him, trembling. You're hurt, he said, noticing the deep gash on her thigh. He stripped off his outer jacket and pressed it against the wound. We need to get you to medical. The exits are blocked, she whispered, her silver eyes darting toward the inferno that had once been the main doors. Her hand clutched at his arm, and even through his shirt he felt a wave of her fear wash over him, the uniquely Larian trait of emotional transference. There's a service corridor, Chris said, trying to project calm despite the situation, through the food court. Can you walk? She attempted to stand and collapse with a cry of pain. I don't think so. Chris didn't hesitate. He scooped her up, one arm under her knees, the other supporting her back. She was surprisingly light in Leah's gravity. Hold on to me, he instructed, navigating through the smoke-filled terminal. Somewhere in the distance, security forces were engaging with what sounded like multiple attackers. Energy weapons discharged, leaving the air smelling of ozone in burnt plastic. The young woman's arms tightened around his neck. Her face, despite the pain and fear, was strikingly Beautiful high cheekbones, delicate features, and a luminescence to her skin that seemed to pulse with her rapid heartbeat. "What's your name?" Chris asked, hoping to keep her conscious as he carried her toward the service corridor. "Liera," she murmured, her breathing shallow. Liera Elvenile. The name registered vaguely something important about House Elvenile that he should remember from the cultural briefing, but he couldn't place it now. "I'm Chris Winters, Earth cargo pilot and apparently emergency rescue service." He tried for levity as he kicked open the service door and maneuvered them into the relative safety of the narrow corridor. "You saved me," she whispered, her silver eyes locking with his. "I sensed your heart when you lifted that beam. You weren't even afraid." "Oh, I was terrified," Chris admitted, setting her down gently on a maintenance bench. "I just don't have time for fear when there's something more important to do." He examined her leg wound more carefully. The bleeding had slowed, but she needed medical attention soon. He activated his emergency beacon, hoping spaceport security would triangulate their position. "Most people would have run," Liera said, her voice wavering. "Most people do run when House Elven is targeted." Chris frowned. "This attack was aimed at your family." She nodded weakly. "It's not the first. We're complicated politically." "Well, politics or not, you're going to be okay," Chris said firmly, checking her pulse. Her skin felt feverish under his touch, and a wave of gratitude and something deeper washed over him, an emotional transference so intense it made his head swim. "Chris Winters of Earth," she murmured, her eyes growing unfocused. "I won't forget what you did today." Her hand reached up to touch his face. He should have moved back. Contact with Lishan's skin was known to intensify emotional transference, but he remained still as her cool fingers traced his jawline. "Help is coming," he assured her, hearing the approach of emergency responders in the corridor. "In my culture," she whispered, "we believe that life debts must be acknowledged through the soul." Before he could react, she pulled herself up and pressed her lips gently against his. The kiss lasted only seconds, but it felt like being struck by lightning. Emotions not his own cascaded through him: gratitude, pain, fear, and something else. Something uniquely Lorien that had no Earth equivalent. When she pulled away, her silver eyes were wide with something that looked like surprise at her own actions. "I'm sorry," she whispered as emergency responders burst into the quarter. "I shouldn't have, but I had to." Then she collapsed against him, unconscious. Emergency medical technicians swarmed around them, lifting Lyra onto a hovering stretcher. One of them nodded to Chris. "You saved a daughter of House Elvenile. The High Chancellor will want to thank you personally." Chris shook his head, still dazed from the kiss. "No thanks necessary. Just doing what anyone would do." The technician gave him an odd look. "Not for an Elvanio they wouldn't." Before Chris could ask what he meant, another team escorted him to a different medical bay for treatment of his minor injuries. Through the blur of medical scanners and bandages, he caught glimpses of news feeds showing the attack coordinated bombings across the spaceport targeting the diplomatic summit. The attackers had been captured or killed, identified as members of an extremist faction from a neighboring system. No one mentioned House Elvenile specifically, but Chris couldn't shake the feeling that Lyra's presence at the spaceport hadn't been coincidental. Eventually cleared by medical, he was escorted to temporary accommodations for displaced travelers. While the spaceport underwent emergency repairs, "Your ship is undamaged, Mr. Winters," the security officer informed him, "but all departures are suspended for at least 48 hours. Chris nodded, too exhausted to argue. "I could use the rest anyway." Sleep came quickly in the sterile room, but his dreams were chaotic, filled with silver eyes, violet skin, and emotions that didn't belong to him. At precisely 700 hours, a sharp knock on his door jolted him awake. Two tall Luricians in formal attire stood outside, their expressions unreadable. "Christopher Winters," the taller one asked. Chris rubbed his face. "That's me. If this is about my statement on the attack, I already gave it to security. This is not about your statement. You have been summoned to appear before the High Court of Ritual Bonds immediately." "The what now?" Chris blinked. "Look, I'm just a cargo pilot. Whatever High Court you're talking about, I'm pretty sure they don't have jurisdiction over me." The shorter Lishan handed him an official-looking document, the translator embedded in the paper converting the symbols to English as he looked at them. "By virtue of the kiss exchange with Liera Elvano, you have entered into a binding ritual agreement under Larisian Common Law Section 17. Paragraph Rex. Your presence is required within the hour." Chris stared at the document. "This is a joke, right? Some kind of thank you for the rescue ceremony?" The Lions didn't smile. "This is no ceremony, Earthman. This is a legal proceeding with significant consequences. Transport has been arranged." Before he could further protest, they escorted him to a sleek hovering vehicle that whisked him through the purple-tinted cityscape of Loria's capital crystalline spires rose into the lavender sky, connected by translucent bridges that seemed impossibly delicate under different circumstances. Chris would have been around. The vehicle deposited them at the base of the grandest structure he'd seen. Yet a massive crystalline building that spiraled upward like a frozen hurricane. Inside, the corridor seemed to go on forever, lined with Lycians who stared openly at Chris as he passed. "Why is everyone looking at me like I'm heading to my execution?" he muttered. "Not execution," the taller escort replied. Without turning, binding. They entered a circular chamber where 7 elderly Lycians sat on elevated platforms, their skin a deeper purple than any Chris had seen before. In the center of the room, a holographic image hovered, a perfect recreation of the moment Lear had kissed him in the service corridor. Chris froze. "You were recording that during a terrorist attack?" Court mediator drones. "Record all interactions in public spaces," one of the elders explained, his voice resonating unnaturally in the chamber. "For exactly such situations as this." "What situation?" Chris demanded. "I helped someone who was injured. She kissed me on my planet. That's called gratitude, not a legal issue." The central elder raised his hand for silence. "Christopher Winters of Earth, do you deny that you received the kiss of Liera Elvano, youngest daughter of House Elven, 7th in the succession?" "I don't deny it, but and were you wearing emotional barriers at the time of this exchange?" Chris touched his bare hands, suddenly aware he left his gloves behind. "In the chaos, no, but that's because I was administering emergency medical aid." The elders conferred among themselves in whispers. Finally, the central figure addressed him again. "The intent is irrelevant in matters of ritual binding. The fact remains you have kissed Liera of House Elvenile, the youngest daughter. According to Article 17 PRX of our ancient laws, you are now bound to all sisters of the house, for their souls are one and the union is collective." The words hung in the air as Chris tried to process them. "I'm sorry, what all sisters? Collective union, what exactly does that mean?" A side door opened and 7 violet-skinned women entered the chamber. They arranged themselves in a semicircle facing Chris, each one studying him with varied expressions of curiosity, disdain, or amusement. "These are the 7 daughters of House Elven," the elder announced. "By law, you are now bound to each in the sacred bonds of unity." Chris's mouth went dry. "You mean like marriage?" The elder tilted his head. "Your Earth concept is simpler but essentially correct. The bond units body, mind, and future purpose." "This is insane," Chris protested, looking from the elders to the sisters. "I don't even know these women." It was a thank you kiss during an emergency. The youngest stepped forward. Liera now recovered from her injuries, her silver eyes meeting his with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "I'm sorry, Chris Winters. I didn't realize when I kissed you I was overwhelmed. I forgot that the ritual doesn't require intent to be binding, so tell them it was a mistake," Chris implored. "It doesn't work that way," another sister cut in sharply. This one stood military straight, her hair cut short and practical, her expression openly hostile. "Once sealed, the bond cannot be undone. Though trust me, Earthman, I'm no happier about being bound to a cargo hauler than you are about this situation." "Celestia, please," Liera murmured. "No, let's be clear with him," Celestia continued. "He's now legally bound to all 7 of us. Me, a combat pilot with 3 battle medals; Anari, our biotech specialist; Virilia, our diplomat; TR, our scientist; Maori, our house leader; Serena, our cultural ambassador; and little Liera, our empath. Congratulations on your instant family." Human. Chris looked from one sister to the next, trying to match names to faces. Enri watched him with scientific curiosity, her eyes calculating behind sophisticated tech implants. Virilia's stance was pure diplomatic grace, though her gaze held unmistakable sensuality. Tyre's fingers moved constantly over a portable data device, apparently already running some kind of analysis on him. Maori, clearly the eldest, regarded him with stern authority, and Serena, draped in what appeared to be performance attire, seemed positively delighted by the unfolding drama. "This can't be legal under interplanetary law," Chris said, turning back to the elders. "I'm an Earth citizen. Your marriage rituals can't be binding on me." "Actually," Virilia spoke, her voice melodious and practiced, "when you registered your ship at our spaceport you signed Form CR7 paragraph 34 agreeing to abide by all local customs and laws during your stay. That includes ritual bindings." "Nobody reads paragraph 34, Chris exclaimed, "which is why so many off-worlders find themselves in unexpected situations," Virilia replied, with a small smile, "though rarely one as significant as yours." The central elder cleared his throat. "There is more at stake here than mere ritual, Earthman. House Elvenile is not an ordinary family, they are the hereditary guardians of the Heart device, a technology vital to our world security and potentially to galactic peace. The attack at the spaceport, Chris said slowly, pieces falling into place. It wasn't random, they were targeting your family. Maori nodded. Solemnly, the hegemony believes that if they eliminate House Elvano they can claim the Heart device for themselves. What they don't understand is that only the combined emotional resonance of all 7 sisters focused through a shared bondmate can activate it, and now that's me. Chris looked around the circle of violet faces. This is crazy, I'm a cargo pilot, not whatever the hell a bondmate is supposed to be. The universe works in mysterious ways, Serena said with theatrical flair. One moment you're hauling agricultural equipment, the next you're the linchpin of galactic politics. Makes for a far better story, don't you think? This isn't a story, Chris snapped, this is my life. Our lives, Tyre corrected, finally looking up from her device. According to my preliminary compatibility analysis, you possess several qualities that make you an adequate candidate, though significant improvement will be required. Chris ran his hands through his hair in frustration. I can't believe this is happening. Nevertheless, it is the law. The elder and you will accompany the sisters to the Alvanio estate to begin the harmony process immediately. What's the harmony process on? Chris asked wearily. Lara stepped closer, her expression gentle. It's how we learn to harmonize our emotional energies with yours. It's intimate, but not in the way you might be thinking. Oh, sometimes in exactly the way he's thinking, Serena added with a wink. Serena Maori scolded as the sisters began arguing among themselves, Celestia declaring Chris utterly unworthy, Inari suggesting biological compatibility tests, Virelia proposing diplomatic approaches to the situation, Tyre insisting on structured evaluation protocols, Maori demanding respect for tradition, and Serena dramatically proclaiming the romantic potential of the scenario. Chris felt the room spinning around him. This morning he'd been a simple cargo pilot, now he was legally bound to 7 alien women entangled in interplanetary politics and apparently central to activating some mysterious device that could affect galactic peace, all because of one kiss. I don't have a choice in this, do I? He finally asked when there was a break in the sisters' argument. The central elder shook his head. The path has been set, Christopher Winters, you may walk it with grace or with resistance, but walk it you must. Hours later, a private transport delivered Chris and his new family to the Alvanile estate, a breathtaking crystalline palace suspended over Lisha's violet oceans. The structure seemed to float on light itself, refracting the planet's purple sunsets into rainbows that danced across its surfaces. A small army of staff escorted him to private quarters that dwarfed his entire ship. Floor to ceiling windows revealed the alien seascape below, stretching to the horizon where 2 moons were beginning to rise. These will be your rooms, Mary informed him formally. You will begin individual harmony sessions with each of us tomorrow. I suggest you rest and prepare yourself. When they left him alone, Chris unpacked his meager belongings, a few changes of clothes, his pilot's license, a battered copy of The Old Man in the Sea, and a photo of his parents back on Earth. He arranged them on surfaces designed for possessions far more grand, the items looking pathetically inadequate in the opulent space. Standing at the window, he watched the alien sunset paint the sea below in shades of deep violet and wondered how a routine cargo run had transformed into the most complicated relationship in the galaxy. What the hell have you gotten yourself into this time, Winters? He murmured to his reflection in the crystalline glass behind him. The empty room offered no answers, only the promise of 7 very different futures, now inextricably bound to his own sleep. Eluded Chris that night. The crystalline walls of his new quarters somehow amplified both silence and sound. The distant crash of alien waves below, the occasional footsteps of staff outside his door, and the thundering of his own heartbeat. Dawn broke with a chime from an unseen speaker, followed by a holographic display materializing beside his bed. Lara's face appeared, her silver eyes bright against her violet skin. Good morning, Chris. I hope you slept well. Your first harmony session begins in 1 hour. With me. Her enthusiasm was almost painful given his sleep-deprived state. A guide will bring you to the Crystal Gardens where something comfortable. The message dissolved, leaving Chris staring at the ceiling. Comfortable, he muttered. Right, because I definitely packed my meeting my 7 alien wives casual wear. 58 minutes later, dressed in his least wrinkled cargo pants and a simple black t-shirt, Chris followed a silent staff member through a labyrinth of crystalline corridors. Each turn revealed new wonders, gardens where plants grew in impossible configurations, artwork that seemed to move when viewed from different angles, and windows that displayed views of places clearly not on Laria. The Crystal Gardens exceeded anything he could have Imagine towering formations sprouted from the ground like frozen explosions. Each catching and refracting light in hypnotic patterns. At the center of it all stood Liara, her simple white dress. Billowing gently in a breeze that seemed to touch nothing else. "You came," she said, a smile illuminating her features. "Did I have a choice?" Chris asked, then immediately regretted his tone when her smile faltered. "Sorry, this is just a lot to process." "I understand," she approached, stopping just short of touching distance. "That's why I requested to be your first harmony partner. I thought perhaps it might be easier with the one who got you into this mess." Despite himself, Chris smiled. "At least you admit it's a mess, eh?" "Beautiful mess, perhaps," she suggested hopefully. "The jury's still out on that one." Lara gestured toward a path that wound through the crystal formations. "Walk with me, I'd like to show you something." As they moved deeper into the garden, the crystals grew more complex, some seeming to pulse with internal light. Lara explained that the formations were semi-sentient, responding to emotional energy from those around them. When they reached a small clearing, she stopped. "May I?" she asked, extending her hand. Chris hesitated, remembering the emotional transference from their first meeting. "What exactly happens during these harmony sessions?" "It's different with each sister," Lear explained. "We each represent different aspects of our family's connection to the heart device. I embody empathy, the ability to sense, share, and harmonize emotions. My session involves teaching you our emotional language, which requires touching, yes, but I can teach you to control the flow, to feel without being overwhelmed." Chris took a deep breath and placed his hand in hers. Immediately a gentle current of emotion washed over him, curiosity, hope, and a trace of apprehension that mirrored his own. "Focus on the boundary between us," Lara instructed. "Feel where you end and I begin." Chris concentrated, and gradually the foreign emotions became distinct from his own, still perceptible but no longer overwhelming. "That's it," she encouraged. "Now try to send something back, an emotion you choose." He focused on projecting gratitude for her patience. Liara's eyes widened and the crystals around them flared briefly with golden light. "You're a natural," she whispered. They spent the next few hours practicing emotional exchanges, gradually increasing complexity. By midday, Chris could maintain basic emotional boundaries while still allowing controlled sharing. The practice left him mentally exhausted but oddly exhilarated as they rested beneath a particularly intricate crystal formation. Liara's expression grew serious. "The attack at the spaceport, it wasn't random. Our family has been targeted for generations because of the heart device." "What exactly is this device?" "I keep hearing about its ancient technology from before recorded history. Legends say it was created during the empathic wars when emotion-feeding parasites nearly destroyed sentient life. In this sector, the device can harmonize emotional energies across vast distances, healing trauma, resolving conflicts, creating paths for understanding between different species." "Sounds like something that should be shared, not hoarded by one family." Lyra shook her head. "The device chooses its guardians. It bonded with our ancestors, and only those of our bloodline can access its full potential. Even then, it requires all 7 sisters to operate at full capacity, and we must channel our combined energy through a single bond mate. So I'm like an emotional conductor, essentially." "Yes. Though the bond goes much deeper than mere conduction." Her silver eyes met his. "Each sister must form a genuine connection with you, and you with us, for the device to function." "No pressure," Chris muttered. Liara touched his arm gently. "You've already begun with me, I feel it." The warmth in her gaze made Chris uncomfortably aware of how easy it would be to fall for her, this beautiful kind alien who looked at him with such hope. He cleared his throat. "What about your sisters? They don't seem quite as enthusiastic about this arrangement." "They'll come around," Liara assured him. "Even Celestia, though she may try to kill you first." Chris laughed, then realized she wasn't joking. "This isn't a joke, Earthman," Celestia barked the next morning as Chris strapped himself into the co-pilot seat of what appeared to be a Militara interceptor. "Touch anything without my permission and I'll eject you into the stratosphere." "Good morning to you too," Chris replied, taking in the complex control panel. Much of it resembled Earth fighter designs but with significant alien modifications. "Nice ship, nicer than that cargo hauler you call a vessel." Celestia's short, practical haircut emphasized her sharp features as she ran through pre-flight checks with military precision. "I've reviewed your flight records, adequate for a civilian. I suppose I'm touched by your overwhelming praise." She shot him a glare. "Harmony for me means determining if you're worthy of flying at my side. I don't bond with inferior pilots." The ship launched with bone-crushing acceleration, pinning Chris to his seat. Licia's purple landscape blurred beneath them as Celestia pushed the interceptor to speeds that made his cargo runs seem like leisurely strolls. "Impressed yet?" she asked, executing a barrel roll that Would have liquefied his organs without the ship's inertial dampeners by your piloting or your attempt to intimidate me. Chris countered, fighting to keep his voice steady because both are working too. His surprised Celestia laughed, a short sharp sound. At least you're honest. Most try to pretend they're not terrified. She guided the ship toward a canyon system, the walls flashing past at suicidal proximity. My controls mirror yours, show me what you can do. Chris took a deep breath and grasped his control yoke. He started conservatively banking through the wider passages of the canyon, getting a feel for the interceptor's response. Pathetic, Celestia commented. My grandmother flies with more daring and she's been dead for 80 years. Irritation flared in Chris's chest. He tightened his grip and dove the ship through a narrow gap between crystal formations, pulling up at the last possible moment, then executing a tight spiral through a series of floating rock arches. Celestia raised an eyebrow. Less pathetic. For the next hour they traded control, each maneuver becoming more challenging. Chris couldn't match Celestia's precision, but his intuitive flying style seemed to surprise her. When they finally broke atmosphere and soared into space, he felt he'd earned at least a grudging respect. Then the ship's warning systems blared. Incoming hostiles, Celestia announced instantly. All business, Hemini scout ships, 3 of them. She flipped a series of switches and weapon indicators illuminated across the dashboard. This wasn't part of the plan. You have a plan? Chris asked as she executed an evasive maneuver that sent his stomach lurching. The plan was to determine if you're completely useless, she replied. Targeting systems locking onto the approaching vessels. Apparently the hegemony has their own plans. Energy weapons flash past their ship. Celestia returned fire, her movements confident and precise, but the enemy ships separated, attempting to flank them. Take the auxiliary controls, she ordered. Keep us away from their crossfire while I target the lead ship. Chris grabbed the secondary yoke, using every trick he'd learned hauling cargo through pirate-infested territories. He wasn't a combat pilot, but he knew how to avoid getting hit. The ship danced under their combined control, weaving through the enemy formation. Celestia destroyed 1 hostile, but the remaining 2 coordinated their attack runs with unexpected precision. A glancing hit rattled their ship and alarms screamed as multiple systems went offline. Port thrusters damaged, Celestia reported, her voice tight. We've lost 20% maneuverability. Another hit like that would them. Chris scanned their surroundings, spotting a field of debris from an old space battle. Head for that debris field, we can use it for cover. That's suicide without full maneuverability. Trust me, I've navigated worse with less. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second and something passed between them. Not Lorisian emotional transference, but simple human trust. Celestia nodded sharply and adjusted their course. They plunged into the debris field, massive hole fragments and shattered equipment creating a 3-dimensional maze. Chris took primary control, threading the interceptor through gaps that seemed impossibly small, using the debris as shields against enemy fire. Celestia focused on weapons, taking calculated shots when the enemy ships appeared in their sights. A particularly dense cluster of wreckage loomed ahead. Chris spotted a narrow passage and committed. Knowing they had one chance to get it right, the ship scraped through with centimeters to spare. Behind them, one pursuing enemy ship miscalculated and collided with the debris, erupting in a fireball that illuminated the field around them. One left, Celestia murmured. Scanning for the final hostile, it appeared suddenly from above, weapons charged for a killing blow before it could fire. Celestia executed a maneuver Chris had never seen, cutting all forward thrusters and rotating the ship on its axis while maintaining their trajectory. The move presented their undamaged weapons array to the enemy, and Celestia fired with deadly accuracy. The hegemony ship disintegrated. Silence fell in the cockpit, broken only by the hum of damaged systems and their heavy breathing. That, Chris said finally, was one hell of a maneuver, and that, Celestia replied, was one hell of a navigation job through the debris field. She glanced at him, her expression guarded but different, evaluating him with new eyes. Where did a cargo hauler learn to fly like that? You develop certain skills when pirates think your shipments are easy targets. Chris shrugged. Though usually I'm running away, not fighting back, as they limped back toward Laria. Celestia's typical hostility seemed diminished. Perhaps there's more to you than I assumed, Earthman. Chris grinned. Was that almost a compliment? It was an observation, she corrected, but a ghost of a smile touched her lips. Don't get used to it. The following days brought harmony sessions with the remaining sisters, each distinctly challenging in their own way. Enery's laboratory fascinated Chris, a blend of biological and technological marvels unlike anything he'd seen on Earth. The quiet sister moved with precise efficiency among her equipment, her tech implants occasionally flickering as she processed data. Your genetic structure is Remarkably adaptable, she informed him, studying a holographic display of his DNA. Humans evolved on a planet with extreme environmental variations. It appears this translated to exceptional emotional adaptability as well as that. Why the kiss affected me so strongly, Chris asked, watching as she extracted a small blood sample from his arm. Partially it's also because she hesitated, something unusual for the typically direct scientist. Your genetic compatibility with Lishan physiology is unusually high, almost as if what enters eyes magnified by her tech. Implant studied his face with clinical intensity, as if there were previous cross-species genetic engineering in your lineage. That's impossible. Humans haven't had contact with Lorisians until the last century. Official contact, Inari corrected. She turned away, focusing on her equipment. There are many gaps in the historical record. Their sessions continued with Inari teaching Chris about Lauritian biology and the scientific principles behind emotional transference. Unlike her sister, she maintained physical distance, their connection developing through shared intellectual curiosity instead, yet somehow her analytical gaze began to feel as intimate as Liera's touch or Celestia's grudging respect. Virelia's harmony approach involved taking Chris into the diplomatic arena, a sphere where her sensual confidence transformed into formidable political skill. She brought him to a negotiation with hegemony representatives, ostensibly as an observer. The meeting took place in a neutral space station orbiting Lisha's outer moon. Virelia glided through the proceedings like a dancer, her words precisely chosen, her body language subtly manipulative. Yet hours into the negotiations, deadlock had been reached over trade routes near Elvenile territory. Perhaps our Earth guest might offer an outside perspective, one of the neutral mediators suggested. When tension peaked, Virelia looked momentarily alarmed but covered it smoothly. Mr. Winters is merely observing today, actually, Chris said, straightening in his chair. I might have a thought. What followed was not the sophisticated diplomacy Virelia had demonstrated, but blunt Earth pragmatism. Chris laid out the obvious benefits of cooperation, pointed out the transparent power plays on both sides, and suggested a compromise that addressed core needs while ignoring posturing. Where I come from, we call this cutting through the, he concluded. Both sides want stability, both sides want profit. The route-sharing proposal I've outlined delivers both without either side losing face. Shocked silence followed, broken by a hegemony delegate's surprised laughter. I like this Earthman, he speaks with refreshing clarity. When the meeting adjourned with a preliminary agreement in place, Virelia studied Chris with new interest as they returned to their shuttle. That was unconventional, she said, her melodious voice carrying a note of admiration. You essentially told career diplomats they were acting like children. Sometimes the direct approach works better than subtlety. Indeed. Her fingers brushed his arm, sending a controlled wave of appreciation through the contact. Your Earth diplomacy accomplished in minutes what I'd been attempting for hours. She leaned closer, sent something like cinnamon and flowers filling his senses. Perhaps there are other areas where your direct approach might be valuable. Chris swallowed hard. Virelia's flirtation was far more overt than her sister's and momentarily disarming. I think we should focus on the harmony process. Her smile widened. That's exactly what I'm suggesting. Chris Winters, as their shuttle docked at a diplomatic archive station for records filing. Virelia guided Chris through halls lined with historical documents and holographic displays. House Elvano has maintained diplomatic relations with a 100 systems for over a millennium, she explained. Every treaty, every negotiation, all recorded here. Chris paused at a display showing Earth's first official contact with Lauricia. My species is very new to your world. Officially, yes. Virelia's expression became unreadable, though there are rumors of earlier unofficial contacts. She led him to a secure chamber where particularly sensitive documents were stored. Place your hand here, she instructed, indicating a scanner. As a bondmaid of House Elven, you should be granted access. Chris complied, expecting a routine verification. Instead, the scanner pulsed with unusual intensity, and a hidden compartment in the wall slid open. Insides had a single data crystal that glowed with internal light. Vireliu stared at it in shock. That's impossible. That sector is restricted to blood members of House Elananil. It shouldn't respond to your biometrics. Before either could react, the crystal floated from its compartment and projected a holographic image between them, a man and woman in Earth scientific attire, their faces hauntingly familiar to Chris. Automatic playback activated. An artificial voice announced message for Christopher Winters. Upon genetic verification, Mom, Dad. Chris whispered. His voice strangled the holographic figures. His parents, Thomas and Ellen Winters, archaeologist, presumed dead in a dig site collapse when he was still a teenager, smiled sadly. Chris, if you're seeing this, it means you've already met one of them. Were all of them his father began. We weren't who you thought we were. his mother continued, we weren't just archaeologists, we were special agents for Earth's diplomatic corps, part of a classified program to create stronger bonds between Earth and Larisha. His father nodded solemnly. Even before you were born it was determined that you would become the heart bridge, the one destined to unite the 7 souls of House Elven. You were conceived with a special purpose, his mother added. You were meant to bond with one of them, but no one expected you would bond with all 7. Chris staggered backward, the room spinning around him. No, he breathed. That's not, I can't be. Virelia reached for him, her expression horrified. Chris, I didn't know. He jerked away from her touch. Did any of you know? Was this all some cosmic setup? Rage and betrayal surged through him. My whole life was anything about it real. He fled the chamber, ignoring Virelia's calls behind him. The following days passed in a blur of confrontation and confusion. Chris demanded answers that none of the sisters seemed to have. TR analyzed the message crystal, confirming its authenticity but finding no additional information. Celestia accused Chris of being complicit, then apologized when she saw his genuine devastation. Even gentle Lara couldn't console him. You were chosen beforehand, Celestia had shouted during one particularly heated argument. We thought you were just an ordinary man who saved our sister, but you were engineered for this. Only Inari remained unsurprised. I suspected genetic intervention, she admitted quietly. Your compatibility was too perfect to be coincidental. The heart device began behaving erratically, its normal stable glow pulsing with irregular patterns that mirrored Chris's emotional turmoil. According to TR's instruments, the device's energy core couldn't function properly with such emotional dissonance at its center. It requires certainty, she explained. Genuine connection, untroubled by doubt. A week after the revelation, alarms blared throughout the Elvenile estate. The hegemony, sensing the device's instability, launched a full-scale attack on the Krystalline Palace. Defensive shields activated automatically, but portions of the structure shattered under concentrated energy weapons. Chris found himself running through chaos-filled corridors searching for the sisters. He found Celestia organizing defense forces, TR activating countermeasures, Virelia attempting emergency communications, Serena using sonic abilities to shatter enemy weapons, and Maori generating protective force fields around critical areas of the palace. Inari appeared at his side, breathless. The heart chamber, Liera went there to stabilize the device. It's in the direct path of their attack. They raced toward the central chamber, dodging falling crystal and energy discharges. When they reached the heart chamber, they found Liera standing before the pulsing device, her hands extended toward it as she attempted to calm its fluctuations. Liera, Chris shouted, we need to get out of here. She turned silver, eyes wide with determination. I can't leave it. If the device falls, millions will suffer. The ceiling above fractured as a concentrated energy beam penetrated the shields. Chris lunged forward, pushing Lara aside as Krystalline shards rained down. Pain exploded across his back and side as a massive shard impaled him, but his momentum carried Liera clear of the collapse. Inari screamed for help as the other sisters converged on the chamber. Chris lay on the floor, blood pooling beneath him, but his eyes saw only Liera, who had taken the brunt of a secondary collapse. Her violet skin had palled to a sickly lavender, blood seeping from multiple wounds. No, he gasped, trying to reach her despite his own injuries. Maori knelt beside her youngest sister, genuine fear breaking through her usually stern expression. Her life force is fading. The wounds are too severe for our medical technology. The device, Tyr said urgently, at full power it could heal her. Heal both of them. It won't activate, Inari replied, her voice breaking. Not without complete harmony. All eyes turned to Maori, the only sister who had maintained emotional distance throughout the harmony process. You know what's required, Serena said softly. Maori's gaze moved from Liera's broken body to Chris's. You were part of a plan, she said, her voice tight with emotion. I resisted because I refused to be manipulated, even by fate. Chris coughed, tasting blood. I didn't ask for this either, he managed, but here we are. And what if it's just the manipulation talking? What if whatever they did to your genetics is forcing feelings that aren't real? Chris laughed weakly. You think I planned to get stabbed by a giant crystal to find myself legally bound to 7 alien women, to discover my whole life was engineered? He reached for Lara's limp hand. None of this was my choice, but how I feel about all of you, that's real, that's mine. The heart device pulsed once strongly, then began to fade as Liera's breathing grew more shallow. Maori, Virelia pleaded, we're out of time. The eldest sister closed her eyes, conflict visible in every line of her body. When she opened them again, something had shifted, a decision made.